Hello. By now, everyone's heard about DeepSeek R1 and the impact it has had on the American stock market. The tumultuous couple of days where NVIDIA's with the world came down 70 to 20% temporarily. So, what is this all about? I'm sure you read this in the newspapers or on TV, but let's just step back and see what is the big deal about DeepSeek R1. Now, just remember, it's a version of ChatGPT that's been modified by a small team in China, and they claim the infrastructure to deploy this is inexpensive, $5 to $6 million apparently, and they claim it's almost as good as ChatGPT. It takes maybe 100 times more resources to deploy in terms of capital expenditure and energy. So, what are we really talking about here? Are we comparing apples to oranges and so on? Now, it all started with the concept of chain of thought. A while back, maybe a year or two ago, chain of thought became very important. If you asked an AI, large language model, a question, it would give you answers. But if you say, why is it true? What makes you think that answer is correct? Or what is the reason for which this answer was derived? What are the reasons that you can spell out? So chain of thought was essentially an OpenAI came up with a solution. OpenAI, as you know, is an American firm. Came up with what is called O1. It used the chain of thought to answer difficult questions in science and mathematics, for example, breaking down problems to their constituents and explaining in steps why and how it came up with an answer. So various testing approaches were used behind the scenes before presenting a conclusion to a user, and it was possible to figure out how the answer was derived, what was the reasoning behind it. Pretty soon after O1 was released, Gemini came up with a reasoning model called Gemini Flash, Flash Thinking in December, I believe. Then Alibaba also claimed to have the Chinese e-commerce giant release a new version of Qwen with some capability of reasoning. Now, DeepSeek released a preview of a reasoning model called R1 a while back. Now, DeepSeek published a large language model, which is a form of an AI that helps you generate text, helps you create poems, create stories, create narratives, answers questions to some extent, sometimes accurately, sometimes not. So, but it's mostly about generating text. So, DeepSeek V3 was a large 700 gigabyte infrastructure solution, too large to run on anything but specialist servers. It had 685 billion parameters separately. All of these large language models had billions of parameters, some in 7 billion range, some in 700 billion range, or a terabyte range. Anyway, now Meta, not to be left behind, came up with Llama 3.1. Meta, as you know, is the parent of Facebook. It released, I think, last July, a 405 billion parameter large language model, Llama 3.1. Now, DeepSeek's LLM is not only bigger than most of its Western counterparts, it's perhaps better, maybe matched only by proprietary models from Google and OpenAI. Now, model makers want to emphasize sound, that they have sound content. The question is, how can you have faith in the answers being provided by this large language models when you ask it a question? Sometimes the guardrails put on the answers. If you ask DeepSeek any questions about socialism or Chinese socialist models, or it's something to do with China, the answers might be a little funky, not what you would expect. People have said if you inquire about Tiananmen Square or something else about Chinese leadership, it comes up with some pat answers that are very palatable to the CCP. Now, on the other hand, the same question asked of Gemini would come up with a different answer. OpenAI would provide a different solution, perhaps. Now, anyway, there is a certain slant or a bent of mind to some of these large language models, especially if they happen to come from China. Now, DeepSeek's gargantuan LLM is notable not just for its scale, but how it's trained, where is the model, how does it feed its data, how does it infer from the data, what are the parameters being set up. There's a training process for all of these large language models, and so DeepSeek, as I said, they claim they trained their models on certain types of data. They trained the models on certain type of reasoning, and then the server farm they have was configured to let individual chips speak to each other in a certain efficient way. And then when they did the computation, they did certain rounding and round off and so on and so forth, some techniques. And the reasoning system essentially works at a lower cost, lowest price point than what OpenAI or Gemini would provide. So that's the benefits being claimed. Now, R1, the DeepSeek's R1, stems from a large base model that DeepSeek had created called V3. Then the Chinese lab, they claim 5 to 6 people worked on it. It could be true, we don't know. The lab then refined this big, large model through a combination of supervised fine-tuning and then the better reinforcement learning, some tweaks here and tweaks there, and reinforcement on labeling of data. And then they ended up with a chatbot, the resultant R1, that can handle intricate prompts and then reveals the reasoning, the steps it takes behind your complex questions. It reveals why it came up with an answer. It tells you how it goes about planning to answer a question. It provides details of how the answer is put together and then the conclusion it arrives at. So it's able to explain to you why it thinks the answer is correct, how it came about the answer. So thanks to these innovations that they claim, they have a whole bunch of parameters that they started with on V3, billions of parameters, and then they took some of those chips, some lot of chip hours, and a certain amount of processing. They claim it's cost them $6 million to process it, maybe a tenth of the computing power that Llama 3 perhaps probably took. They train apparently in cheaper NVIDIA chipsets. The US government had put a restriction on the kind of chipsets NVIDIA could sell to China. So apparently the DeepSeek and most Chinese companies scrounged around, got whatever NVIDIA chipsets they can find, not the top of the line ones, maybe a tier below that, and they were able to use them to process their large language models, to build their models and infrastructure. Anyway, so what is coming back to DeepSeek R1. I did install it on my own machine, on my own desktop, on Alienware Aurora 16 or something, and then it had a GPU, GeForce, NVIDIA's GeForce RT4080 or one of those. So I was able to install it in 10 minutes using Llama. Then I also installed a 67 billion, 8 billion parameter model, the Llama front end. There aids a whole bunch of different size large language models you can download online, put them on a desktop, or maybe even a laptop. The smallest size is probably 7 billion parameters. Anyway, they come in different sizes. You put them on servers, the larger models, smaller ones on desktop, and you can play with it, which I did do. I asked some questions. I said, why is 2 plus 2 4? And came up with a good answer, a good reasoning behind why 2 plus 2 is a 4. I asked them about fractions, and it was able to answer about fractions or explanation as to how fractions are created, half a pizza versus 3/4 of a pizza, and so on. A concept of fraction was well explained. Asked to make a story and a poem, it comes up not only with the answer, but the way it works, it's as a structured approach to develop an answer for you. The R1 uses reasoning that it is capable of. First of all, it sort of builds a scaffolding of an answer. It explains to you how the answer will be put together. And then through that scaffolding, then it fills in the elements of the scaffolding of the structure. Then it provides details that fill into the structure. Then it somehow steps back and gives you overall summary of the answer. So DeepSeek provides essentially an approach to the answer, and then it tells you what it's doing and finally comes up with the answer. So for example, it can give you introduction of your problem that you explain, then it explains to you what it means, that your query means to it. It introduces entities and characters that it thinks are necessary to answer your question, your query, and then it also comes up with interactions between these entities. It explains the dialogue or the interactions between these entities that makes the answer possible. And then after it provides answer, it gives you a conclusion, and then that helps you understand why and how it came about the answer that is providing. So it's a pretty decent way to test it. Anyone can go out there and download DeepSeek R1 on their desktop or laptop, play with it and see what reasoning is all about. Now the point is, if the price point of AI solutions come down because of DeepSeek, and it puts pressure on the open AIs of the world to reduce their price points, to reduce the infrastructure cost, the capital expenditure can be reduced for most companies, most people deploying AI-based solutions, then it's a good thing. In the short term, there may be tumultuous changes in open AIs of the world. If what DeepSeek claims to provide and the price point they claim is possible is indeed true, then I can imagine a lot of third world countries adopting DeepSeek-like approaches or a cut and paste of DeepSeek. You have to remember, DeepSeek is based on OpenAI's ChatGPT, more or less. It sort of uses same techniques, similar techniques, a tweak here, a tweak there, a slightly different reinforcement training, and so on and so forth. But then if that makes it efficient, that makes it more cost effective, so be it. There'll be others who do monkey see, monkey do, and we might have all get much better solutions, deployment solutions, infrastructures with a much lower CAPEX for AI solutions. It might just give a good impetus to all kinds of AI solutions being deployed in a whole lot of corporations, even small-scale industries. So anyway, it's going to be exciting next 6 months, and if DeepSeek does do what it claims it does, then the industry might see a big rush of new solutions, new models, newer cost-effective approaches.